I'm about to make many of you feel old. This year marks Final Destination's 25th anniversary. I was 5 years old when it came out, and since then, it has spawned 4 sequels. And the sequels have varied in quality, with my personal favourite being 2 and 3. The 4th movie, titled The Final Destination, is pretty much universally agreed upon within the fandom as being the worst of the sequels, and the most fake looking too, as it tried to board the 3D craze of the time. The 5th movie was entertaining, but only got good once the twist ending came in. And now we have movie number 6, which is called Final Destination Bloodlines. And in the spirit of Bloodlines, I thought we'd compare the latest sequel with the first movie to see just how this franchise has evolved over the course of 25 years, and see if it has gotten better or worse. Let the battle commence. The story for Final Destination is that a class of students are embarking on a plane trip to Paris, but one of the students named Alex gets a premonition that everyone on board is going to die and warns everyone to get off the plane. His teacher and 4 of his classmates do just that, and to their shock, the plane actually explodes, leaving them all suspicious of how he knew this was going to happen. And it turns out that Death hates spoilers because shortly after he ruins Death's plan, it comes for revenge and kills the remaining survivors in the same order that they would have died on the plane. Death sure is a purist, isn't he?
Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee.
Now, this is a story that all the sequels used as a template, and that includes Final Destination Bloodlines, which is kind of sad because there is a slight twist on the formula at the beginning. It follows a woman named Stephanie who sees visions of her grandmother dying, but it turns out that her grandmother actually had this vision decades ago too, and now it's passed down to her granddaughter. Now when this happened, I thought the movie was going to have a different spin on the Final Destination formula, but nope. That's where the slight twist to the formula ends, and then it goes right back to the usual formula. I mean, you can't fault a formula if it works, but it was disappointing to see them present a new idea, which just ended up going nowhere. An even bigger shame is that it also made no sense. The point this movie is trying to make is that other people who have cheated death because a person had a premonition has resulted in the survivors living long lives and having children. Children that should technically not exist because their parents were supposed to die before they could have them. So now, death is killing the children of the survivors because they were never supposed to live in the first place. But my question is, why did Death take such a long break and allow these survivors to have children, and then have these children grow into teenagers? Because the movies have shown that as soon as these people cheat Death, Death comes after them very shortly after. But for some reason, this movie says that Death decided to take a 20-year break, allowed a whole new generation of kids to not only be born, but become teenagers, and that's when Death decided to get out of retirement and start killing them again. I mean, seriously? Where was he this whole time?
Hello? What's this? I'm not missing. I'm being held hostage by children.
Yeah!
This sounds less like Death's plan and more like Hollywood's plan so they could make more sequels. So this movie makes no sense with its logic, and it actually contradicts what the franchise has told us up till now. So yeah, it had potential, but the more you think about the story, the less it makes sense. Both movies are relatively short to decently lengthed at 1 hour and 38 minutes and 1 hour and 50 minutes respectively. But the pacing for the first movie, I found it better. We are learning all of these rules for the first time, and you do genuinely believe that there is a way for these characters to cheat death. And that mystery and feeling of hope is what keeps the movie interesting, especially when you have these couple of FBI guys on Alex's tail as he is trying to win this thing. The 6th movie, however, is regurgitating what we have seen and heard before, and after 6 movies, it just doesn't land the same way as it did the first time. And they tried to refresh the formula a little bit, but it just ended up not making sense. So the movie with the superior story is Final Destination 1. In Final Destination, our main character is Alex, and I always liked this character. He came across as a genuinely nice person, and just the urgency and the way he pleads with everyone to get off the plane, it shows how much he is not only scared for himself, but for others. And you really feel sorry for him once the disaster does happen and everyone starts to suspect him, even the FBI. And to be fair, who wouldn't suspect him? The movie does a great job of making this seem like a very suspicious incident, and all the characters go through variations of this in the later movies, but I always found Alex's to be the most engrossing of all of them, and the way the movie has him explain Death's rules, it's really captivating. The rest of the characters are also memorable. You have the dorky friend played by a young Sean William Scott, the bully who is just looking for an excuse to start a fight, even their teacher is actually a good person. I also liked the parents in the film. We also have Claire, and she is a decently developed character. You notice a lot about her when the parents of all the victims come to see and embrace their kids after the crash, and she is all alone, with no one to see her after she nearly died. And then later you hear about her backstory and how she lost her father, and it's messed up. And both her and Alex are the leads in the movie, and unlike everyone else, she believed him on the plane, and later gets the remaining survivors to trust him as well. But at the same time, other characters start to treat Alex differently after the crash, and even go as far as to blame him for the deaths of his friends. And I really do like this. The movie could have so easily just got to the killings, but it's actually taking its time to develop some of these characters. And when the characters have a memorial for their dead classmates, the movie really allows you to see these cocky characters in a different light when they're grieving. Again, a lot of horror movies would just skip to the death scenes, but this movie takes its time to allow the characters to grieve, and I really appreciated that, as it genuinely makes you feel and care for these characters and the losses they have experienced. And as for the characters in Final Destination Bloodlines, they're fine. There's a dysfunction in this family, and it's not one that you really care about, but seeing Stephanie go through something traumatic does make you feel for her a little, I suppose. But the way they introduce her into the movie and the pacing of how she suddenly starts preparing everyone for death, it felt like it needed a rewrite or two because it didn't feel completely fleshed out or natural like it did with Alex. That being said, there are some characters that you do grow an attachment to. This guy, for example, I hated him at first and really didn't care if he lived or died. But there came a point where, and I'm being totally serious here, he became my favorite character. But on the whole, there isn't much going on here. They tried to flesh out the family dysfunction a bit, but I just didn't really find myself caring. In many ways, they are just modern Gen Z horror movie characters, and are passable, but not great. Now, the characters in the first movie aren't great either. They are memorable as far as these kinds of movies go, but you won't hear anyone refer to them in the same way that they refer to Sidney or Dewey in Scream, or Ed and Lorraine Warren in The Conjuring. They're nowhere near that level, but they are good, solid characters that will keep your attention and give you people to root for. Even the bully becomes more likable by the end of the film. So yeah, the movie with superior characters is Final Destination 1. Final Destination is a supernatural slasher film, and unlike all the other slasher killers, death's presence is always felt throughout the movie, even when there are no death scenes being set up. And from the very beginning of the first film, it's like the music is preempting you that something very bad is about to happen, and you're on the edge of your seat the entire time. Even scenes that have nothing going on or should be uplifting or exciting all feel like they're about to go terribly wrong. So the horror in this movie is really effective, and this is where the filmmakers can come up with a ton of fun scenarios for the characters to die. And in the case of the first movie, you have a really good variety here. It's really creative seeing how death is triggering a pattern of objects to cause these dangerous events. The deaths can be very quick, and they can also be very slow. They can be unexpected, and they can also be very heavily built up and still take you by surprise. What I love about the Final Destination movies is that their death scenes work like a magic trick. It tricks you into thinking that these characters are going to die in one of many ways, but then they do something else that was completely unexpected. It keeps playing with you in that way, and that really puts you on edge the whole time. And other times you're like, oh, what are you gonna do with that?
Hey, that's never gonna make it all the way over here, buddy. You cut his head off?
Yep.
Wow, Grim. Impressive. Didn't think you had it in you.
What also makes the Final Destination movies a ton of fun is that clues are given to the characters about who is going to die next and how they are going to die. And sprinkling these throughout the movie adds a slight mystery element which keeps you thinking and just perfectly builds on the tension. So I love the death scenes in Final Destination, and as intricate and sophisticated as the events can be, the death scenes feel very grounded. So 25 years later, how do the death scenes compare in Final Destination Bloodlines? Well, the deaths are much more gruesome here. They are very detailed, and the scale of them is so much bigger than all of the previous movies. They really take advantage of the technology that is available to them now, and the deaths are a ton of fun. That being said, it's important to note that the deaths in Final Destination Bloodlines are so over the top that it went full Fast and Furious levels, and the movie knows it. Also, Never before have I wanted to see a kid die in a horror movie, and this movie knows that too. In terms of clues, the movie essentially has an instruction manual that the characters use to get ahead of death, and they never really refer to it all that much, which was very unfortunate. Now, although I really enjoyed the deaths in Final Destination 6, there is a significant difference between the deaths and just the tone of this movie compared to all the previous ones. And that is that this Final Destination film is more of a horror comedy. I know it advertises itself as a horror, but it's not. This movie is in fact a horror comedy, and I would actually say it leans heavier on the comedy, and as a result, quite a few of the death scenes are less about the horror and more about the fun and laughs. And as fun as that is, you don't get that feeling of dread or eeriness like you do with the first film. There was one death in a truck, is all I will say, and it had tension and was shocking when it happened, but the very next scene following it ended up being funny, and my whole theater was laughing. And the music was so generic and didn't bring any of that tension or dread like it did in the first film. So this movie doesn't have as much of a grasp on its tone as the first film did, or even the rest of the films. Now, it was not completely devoid of serious deaths. There was one death in particular that was so horrific that it made me cringe in my seat. And one girl a few seats to my left actually made crying sounds. And this death scene was intense and had no comedy to ruin it. So there are one or two serious deaths in this movie, but that's about it. So there are two ways to look at this. If you want to see deaths that are more creative and bloody, albeit way over the top, then you'll get that in Bloodlines. But if you want death scenes that are filled with tension and horror and are played straight all the way through, then the first movie is for you. So whichever one you pick all comes down to personal taste, and as good as the tension and setup could be in Bloodlines, it didn't match up to the consistent amounts of tension and dread that I felt in the first movie, and altering that for laughs kind of diluted the horror for me. Although I will say, death covering its tracks, I always thought that was a bit much in the first one. So we have two very different executions here, one more horrific and the other more comedic. Everyone will have their own favourite style, but in my opinion, the movie with superior horror and deaths is the first movie. So if you were hoping in this day and age of horror that we'd get something more creative and innovative, you're going to be disappointed. Final Destination Bloodlines is not reinventing anything, it's just more of the same, but funnier and with a bigger budget. But with that said, it's been a while since we have gotten a Final Destination movie, and if you know what you're getting into, I think you're gonna have a good time. Despite the more comedic tone in Bloodlines, I still really enjoyed myself. I just wish it had more of an emphasis on horror, which is what the first movie had. Everything seems to be going for a more comedic take these days, and I don't know how I feel about that. The first movie, after all these years, still holds up as a solid horror flick. I saw it in theaters as a double bill with Bloodlines, and the characters are still good, the deaths hold up, and it had the perfect pace and runtime. It didn't overstay its welcome, and like many other filmgoers out there, I do consider it to be a horror classic. It's time for the scores. Final Destination 1 gets an 8 out of 10, and Final Destination Bloodlines gets a low 7. And I gotta say, it was so nice to see Tony Todd in this film. He shot this movie before his passing, and it's nice that we got another movie with him, and are also going to get another game with him in Insomniac's Venom. And I noticed they put the original Final Destination music in when he appears, and they even give some new backstory to his character and how he understands death so well. And that was interesting, but it does go against the popular theory of him being death or a servant of death, which is something that people have theorized over the years, including myself. And they also give Tony Todd a goodbye in this movie, and it's funny, because you'd almost think that they knew he was going to die based off of the dialogue they give him. And since we're honoring the dead, the score for the first movie was composed by Shirley Walker. If that name sounds familiar to you, it should. She is the legendary composer for Batman the Animated Series. She also composed the music for Batman Mask of the Phantasm, and it's incredible to hear her range as a composer. And if you listen closely, there are small parts of the music that resemble some of the Batman Animated Series music. The music in Final Destination is incredible. It is actually one of the most underrated horror movie soundtracks to me. It just fills you with this feeling of dread and hopelessness. And sadly, the music in Bloodlines was nowhere near as effective. And the sound design is also top notch. To this day, this is some of the best sound design I have ever heard in a movie.
You fucking prick! Oh shit!
That is so cool. People actually jumped in the theater when this happened. I didn't, although this jump scare did get me. In the end, I had fun with the 6th movie, but both the tone and characters were superior in the original, and whereas I have rewatched the first movie several times, I can't see myself doing the same with Final Destination Bloodlines. If you enjoyed this Versus video and like what I do, please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Even a $1 donation will help keep the lights on, and you'll get a ton of additional content in return, such as my trailer reaction to the brand new Superman trailer, as well as the trailer to Peacemaker Season 2. And a big thanks to all my patrons who are supporting me. Now tell me, Final Destination Bloodlines. The movie doesn't come out until tomorrow, but are you going to watch it? And what did you think of the first 5 movies, and how would you rank them? For me, it is 1, 3, 2, 6, 5, and 4. Be sure to let me know your list in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Please do give the video a thumbs up, and be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell right next to it so you can stay up to date with all of my future Versus videos. And I will catch all of you very soon. Take care.